If you decide to tell the unvarnished truth to people in power, there is almost always a bill that comes due. Throughout history, challenging a rigid, oppressive system demands a severe physical and social toll. You see it vividly in the civil rights movement, where citizens met the brute force of state-sanctioned violence with nothing but their own bodies. They faced dogs, tear gas, and high-pressure hoses simply for demanding basic human equity. The most potent threat to an empire is not an armed rebellion, but rather the presence of a person who maintains unshakable integrity and radical peace in the face of absolute hatred. To understand that power, we have to look at a man whose refusal to bow down forced an entire establishment to confront its own decay. We need to go back to the early church in Jerusalem. While many imagine this community was perfectly unified, it was fractured by a deep cultural division. The Hebrew-speaking Jews held the central power, leaving the Greek-speaking Hellenists as a vulnerable minority. This is a flowchart mapping how resources moved in that early community, and it reveals a massive systemic inequity. During the daily food distribution, resources were pooled within the Hebrew majority, while the marginalized Hellenist widows were systematically neglected. The community appointed Stephen, a Hellenist himself, to step into the logistical work of food distribution. He was tasked with the behind-the-scenes job of serving tables to ensure the marginalized were fed. Stephen treated this mundane logistical task with supreme integrity. But when a marginalized person fixes a systemic flaw, they become an unexpected threat to the foundational power structure of their society. Stephen's excellence at his job quickly spilled out into the broader community. He began speaking with a wisdom and clarity that the religious authorities simply couldn't debate. Educated men from multiple synagogues tried to shut him down in theological arguments, and they lost every single time. Because they couldn't beat him honestly, the establishment changed the rules of the game. They found people willing to lie, fabricated charges, stirred up a mob, and dragged Stephen before the Sanhedrin, the highest and most powerful religious court in the land. Standing in front of the men holding his life in their hands, Stephen didn't sugarcoat his defense. Instead, he delivered a historical masterclass. He systematically walked them through their own history, pointing out exactly how their ancestors had consistently oppressed the righteous. He held up a mirror to their power, and they despised what they saw. When a rigid system's authority is exposed by undeniable facts, its default reaction is a desperate, uncontrolled rage. The historical text notes the council was so furious they literally gnashed their teeth at him. The council members cover their ears and yell at the top of their lungs. They drag Stephen out of the city to execute him, but as the screaming mob rushes around him, his face remains completely serene. Witnesses noted he had the face of an angel. As the heavy stones begin to fall, Stephen does something nearly impossible to process. He doesn't curse his attackers, and he doesn't beg for his life. He falls to his knees and cries out, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." An empire knows exactly how to process anger. It relies on violence to maintain order. But an oppressive system has absolutely no defense mechanism against radical forgiveness. By refusing to return their hatred, Stephen took away their power. Releasing resentment in the final moments of a violent execution strips the oppressors of their ability to define their victim's heart. Right before the stones fell, Stephen looked up and saw a vision that challenged the established order of heaven. In almost every biblical text, Jesus is described as sitting at the right hand of God, the traditional posture of a king on his throne. But Stephen saw Jesus standing up. Theologian James Cone used this imagery to connect the Roman cross with the American lynching tree. Both were state-sanctioned tools used to crush those who resisted an unjust system. They carry the same theological weight. In the ancient world, a ruler stood up to honor a hero or show solidarity with a guest. By rising from his throne, Jesus is acknowledging Stephen's witness. This posture proves that God is unequivocally positioned in solidarity with the oppressed, standing with those whose backs are against the wall. Stephen died, but the narrative didn't end there. Standing in the crowd, holding the coats of the men throwing the stones, was a fierce young opponent named Saul. Saul watched Stephen's composure and heard that final prayer of forgiveness. That moment planted a seed in Saul's mind that eventually grew, turning him into the Apostle Paul, the man who would author most of the New Testament. You rarely get to see the immediate reward of your faithfulness, but holding on to your integrity under intense pressure plants revolutionary seeds in the people watching you. In the 20th century, we see this same model of unwavering truth-telling used against American white supremacy. Men like Medgar Evers stood his ground, demanding the right to vote, fully aware of the price the empire might extract. The cost was agonizing, paid even by the completely innocent. Like the 4 young girls in Birmingham whose lives were stolen on a Sunday morning at the 16th Street Baptist Church. John Lewis and his colleagues understood that true societal liberation requires a steadfast witness. They faced clubs and tear gas on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, refusing to return hate for hate. True legacy is forged when you live with unshakable conviction, even when standing cost everything. By refusing to blink, you ensure your truth speaks louder and lives longer than the empire trying to tear you down.